guys, welcome to today's video. We are continuing with Eyeshadow Palette Week. If you've missed any of my other videos, I will link those down below. We're talking about different eyeshadow palettes and collections and tags throughout the whole week. But today we are focused on mini palettes or smaller palettes. So I personally love finding mini palettes that have 5 or 6 shadows in them that give me a lot of diversity, because sometimes you don't need a giant palette to create a whole bunch of different looks. And there's something about a very simplified eyeshadow routine where you can make several different beautiful looks with one palette without even thinking that just appeals to me. As someone who used to travel quite a bit for work too, I also appreciate a mini palette because it just takes up less space. And so when I have a mini palette that helps me go in a lot of different directions and has phenomenal quality to the shadows, I find myself reaching for those quite a lot to throw into my travel makeup bag. So today I wanted to highlight my top 5 mini eyeshadow palettes and talk to you about why I really think that they are something special. We need to start with what I think is probably the oldest one out of the ones we're going to talk about today, and it is one I mentioned in the first video this week as it relates to smallest eyeshadow palettes, but I had to put it in here too because I also think that it's just in my top 5 mini smaller eyeshadow palettes just in general, and this is the Tarte Pro To Go palette. I absolutely love this little mini palette. It does have a little mirror at the top, and it's actually, for the size of this palette, a pretty decent sized mirror. You've got a combination of 3 mattes and 3 shimmer shades in here that I feel allow you to go a lot of different directions. You've got a gold, a berry, and a copper shade here that can take your look from sort of daytime smoky brown eye to something that's more colorful with this cranberry shade. If you just use this sort of first matte transition shade and the brown, you've got a very neutral look by using those 3 there. Or if you wanted to go a little bit more warm, I could easily pull that in my crease, this warm reddish brown here, and this copper on my lid, and I've gone very warm toned. I just feel like this is the perfect mix of 6 colors that's going to give me a ton of different looks, and I've traveled with this over and over and over again. So a mini palette that continues to just bring a smile to my face every time I use it. Let's talk about a cool toned palette. This is one from Smashbox. This is their Cover Shot Punked Eyeshadow Palette. Now, I have to say, I tried some of the Cover Shot palettes when they first came out, and I was kind of apathetic about the formulas. I thought the mattes were like okay, and a good number of the shimmers were kind of lackluster. And so I kind of blown off this entire eyeshadow palette idea. Smashbox at a certain time was putting out tons of these back and forth. One day I was standing in Sephora and just kind of walking around, and I noticed that they released a new version, and this was a very cool toned palette, and I was like, oh, that color story is really pretty. So I walked over and swatched it in store, and I was blown away by how insanely pretty the foil shades were in particular, and that was not something I had seen in their earlier palettes. And then the shimmer, or the matte shades rather, blended like a dream, like just had such lovely pigmentation to it. So then I flipped over the packaging on this palette and compared the ingredients in this palette to the other ones that had launched earlier and realized it was a completely different formulation. And so I picked up this palette and I haven't looked back. This is one of my favorite cool tone palettes in my collection. I really appreciate the fact that you have the ability to go true taupe by leveraging these 2 shades here in the middle, which are going to give you your classic cool tone taupey smoky eye. You can also go a little bit more plummy toned by using this purple, which is a little bit more of a grungy, deeper purple all over the lid. You've got a nice deeper charcoal gray matte in here, and then you've got this brighter sort of light taupe shimmer, which I had swatched earlier, which is great for inner corner and really makes for a bright lid. When I think of my favorite cool tone palettes, I almost always, this is almost always the first one that pops into my brain because I just think it's fantastic. And I also feel like, for as small as it is, I'm getting a lot of diversity in terms of the different looks and the way my eyeshadow can turn out using this palette. All right, so let's talk about a palette that's newer to my collection. I think I've only had it for about a month, but I really enjoy it. This is the Natasha Denona Mini Retro Palette. Now, I have had her Mini Sunset Palette. I did not care for it. I thought the formula on that was kind of crap. I also had the Mini Lila palette. I ended up decluttering that. That one was fine performance-wise, but I just realized I wasn't reaching for it a ton given its color story. And then I also still have a oh, it's the more neutral one. It's the one that Samantha March loves. I can't think of the name of it. I have that one and I like it, but not as much as I love this Mini Retro. I just think the color story in this Mini Retro is so fun. I love that I can go a little bit more of that cool tone taupey looks in here. I've also got this really bright, multi-dimensional sort of chrome shade here. This shade is really hard to capture on film, but it has a silver micro glitter in it, but then it also has pink, maybe pinkish purple micro glitter, and actually a teal micro glitter in here as well. So it is far more multi-dimensional in person than I feel like anyone, myself included, has been able to capture on film. It was the thing that jumped out at me the most when I got this in the mail. I really like this sort of pinky toned neutral, and then you've got a really pretty sort of gold peach shifting shade in here as well. You can just make so many pretty looks, and I feel like I've got a lot of options inside of this palette. The quality is fantastic, and listen, this is a tiny palette, and you know, at a cost per ounce perspective, it's pricey, but I also think its quality, at least for this one, is absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, there's something very cute about this packaging that I do very much enjoy. So I like Natasha Denona putting out these mini palettes because I think it makes her formulas a little bit more approachable for the average person, because not everyone is going to want to spend $100 or $200 on an eyeshadow palette, and putting these out in smaller pans but making them around that $25 price point I think was just very smart on her part. So I love this little mini retro palette, and I am really excited to use it every time I reach for it. Bare Minerals is a brand that I think doesn't get a lot of attention for their eyeshadow palettes because I feel like they've been all over the board with their formulations. Different palettes have had different formulas, and you don't necessarily have, at least I don't, a definitive like, oh, that's the Bare Minerals formula when you think about their eyeshadows. I feel like there's certain brands who I think have honed a thought process for what their eyeshadow formulas will be like, and they are very consistent. Bare Minerals has kind of been all over the board. I've swatched some palettes from them that I wasn't that impressed with, but the Gen Nude eyeshadow line I really, really loved. And in particular, this copper palette stands out to me because although it is just a 6-pan eyeshadow palette, I feel like I can make such pretty looks inside of here. It is a combination of 3 mattes. So you've got sort of this lighter tan creamy color, a pinky mauve color, and then a really pretty, very warm, kind of reminds me of like Makeup Geek Cocoa Bear, whatever she has renamed that tag. I think she's renamed it to Cheetah Bear. That's right. So it kind of gives me that kind of vibes in the sense that it's kind of like that cherry brown color. You've got this really interesting olive green. You've got this very bright copper with just a hint of rose to it. And then you have a fantastic sort of peachy champagne color. I think the formula is absolutely beautiful. It catches the light in such a pretty way. I really like the 3 shimmer shades that they included with these mattes because I feel like, heck, even that is an interesting look in and of itself, right? And I'm not somebody who will only use mattes in their crease or will only use a matte to darken an eye look. Like, I will happily dive into a greenish shade to darken it up and make it look sort of smudgy and green in the outer corner. So I don't know, this formula is really nice. I own a cool tone palette in this collection as well, and I just really enjoy this formula. I think it is definitely underrated, and it's definitely a palette that whenever I'm thinking of interesting small palettes, this one pops very quickly to the top of my brain. Now, to date, we've been talking about eyeshadow palettes that have 5 or 6 shades in them for the most part. This is a palette that's very small in stature, but actually has quite a few shades in it. But I always think of it the same way I do like this copper palette because it's so tiny. Like, to be honest, you know, it really does fit my sort of thinking as it relates to small palettes. And so the palette I'm talking about here is from Pota Beauty, is the Smoky Obsessions palette. I never purchased any of the other ones just because I felt like the color stories were just not right for me. The more that I looked at them and played with them, I just felt like a lot of times they were going a little more bold than I wanted to with some of the eyeshadow colors. The Smoky Obsessions, on the other hand, I think is actually a great neutral palette. You can clearly go smoky with this palette. It definitely has enough deeper shades that is going to give you that really classic smoky eye. But I also find with the inclusion of this sort of camel color up here and some of these lighter lid shades here, you can very easily get to an everyday wearable look inside of here. You don't have to go smoky. This silver is absolutely stunning. It is incredibly wet looking on the eyes. Actually, all of the shimmers in here are very wet looking. I still maintain this is the best matte black ever. I have swatched a lot of matte blacks, even though I don't necessarily love them. They're included in a lot of eyeshadow palettes, and this matte black is so pigmented and has such, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it just goes and goes and goes and goes the way that I've never seen a matte black eyeshadow do in my life. So if you are a matte black eyeshadow lover and really love the darkest, blackest matte possible, I don't think you're gonna find anything better than the one in here. It's just shockingly black. I love this palette. I've traveled with it quite a few times. Like, this is a palette that I would take to Vegas when I have a work conference, because I could have a daytime eye in here very easily to, you know, go to my meetings and do the conferences, and then go back to my room and smoke it up and really get an intense sort of going out in Vegas kind of eye with this palette. And that's kind of how I think about it. It's this very compact, lots of options for shades in this like bite-sized little package. So yeah, Pota Beauty Obsessions palette, the smoky version. Definitely worth checking out if you have not. So those are my top 5 mini or small palettes in my collection. Would love to know what your top 5 are. Do you enjoy mini palettes? Do you find them just too limiting for the color selection? Or are you like me and you really enjoy finding an eyeshadow palette that gives you lots of diversity in a very small scale package? Would love to know your thoughts on mini palettes in general. And if you have any favorites that I didn't mention today, let me know down in the comments. I'm always interested to find out what your favorite eyeshadow palettes are. So that wraps this up. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on the final video coming out tomorrow. Tomorrow is a good one. We're going to be talking about my top 10 favorite brands overall, and then the favorite eyeshadow palette that they make. It's going to be a fun one. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the finale for Eyeshadow Week, which will be coming out tomorrow. I hope you guys are having an amazing week. Talk to you soon. Bye.